The most dangerous man in the city wasn't sitting on a throne of gold. He was sitting in a plastic chair in room 302 of San Lucian General, eating lukewarm jello and watching his daughter breathe through a machine. For 6 months, Rico Maldini had been invisible. The nurses knew him as the man in room 302, the widower who shuffled through the pediatric wing with hollow eyes and hands that trembled when he touched his comatose daughter's hair. They pitied his silence. They whispered about his grief. They brought him coffee and told him to eat, to rest, to take care of himself. They had no idea those same hands had once orchestrated the systematic dismantling of 3 rival families in a single night. They didn't know the hollow gaze that stared at monitors and 4 drips had once watched a warehouse burn with 17 men still inside, and never blinked. They thought he was broken. The Vane Syndicate thought so too. When 5 men in porcelain white masks and tactical gear stepped off the elevator at 2:51 a.m., suppressed rifles in hand, they expected to find a shell of a man, easy prey for a message written in blood. They had come to end the Maldini bloodline while the old king was at his weakest, alone and unarmed in a building full of witnesses too innocent to matter. They were wrong about all of it. Because the man in the gray Henley wasn't broken. He was dormant. And the sterile hallways of San Lucian General, the oxygen lines, the supply closets, the defibrillator carts, the precise geometry of every room he'd mapped for 6 months, weren't a prison. They were his killing floor. This is the story of the night Rico Maldini stopped pretending to be a grieving father and remembered he was the architect of Ash, the strategist who had turned entire city blocks into graveyards without ever firing a shot. It's the story of how he transformed a pediatric ward into a maze of death to protect the nurses who had shown him kindness, the patients who had no idea who slept in the chair beside them, and the daughter who represented the only humanity he had left. It's the story of a man facing an impossible choice: unleash the monster he buried 6 months ago, or watch everyone he's learned to care about die in the crossfire. And it begins with a sound so simple, so ordinary that most people wouldn't even notice it. A ding and the elevator doors opening at the end of the hall. Welcome back to Tales by Jaylene. Before we step into the shadows with Rico Maldini, ask yourself, who is the person you're overlooking right now? You're about to see what happens when the most dangerous man in the city is pushed too far. Subscribe right now so that you don't miss out on our next exciting tales. Drop a comment and tell me where you're watching from. Are you in Rico's city, or somewhere across the world? If you believe power isn't given, it's taken, smash that like button. Now sit back. It's time to see why they call him the architect of Ash. Let's get back to the story. It was a Thursday in late autumn when the rain began. A cold, relentless assault against the windows of San Lucian General Hospital. On the 3rd floor, pediatric intensive care, the air carried the scent of lavender hand sanitizer and the particular kind of silence that exists only in places where miracles and funerals are separated by the thickness of a heartbeat. It was 2:47 a.m. The graveyard shift. The dead hours. Rico Maldini sat in the blue vinyl chair beside bed 302, a plastic spoon halfway to his mouth, lime jello quivering on its surface like something afraid to be consumed. To anyone walking past, and few did at this hour, Rico was a fixture. Part of the landscape. He was 42 with salt and pepper stubble that had gone weeks without a razor, dark hair falling across a forehead creased by sleepless nights. He wore the same gray Henley every single day, washed in the hospital laundry room at 3 a.m. when the halls were empty, and moved through the building like a man trying not to disturb ghosts. He never raised his voice. He never asked for anything. When Nurse Dawson brought him coffee, black, no sugar because she'd learned after the first week, he nodded once, a slight dip of the chin that could mean gratitude or could mean nothing at all. When Dr. Patel came by with updates on Sophia's condition, Rico would stare at his daughter's small face, the ventilator tube taped carefully to her cheek, and whisper 2 words, "Thank you." That was all. "He's been here 6 months, said Marcus Webb, a third-year resident with 3 days of scruff and the kind of exhaustion that made people say things they shouldn't. He was leaning against the nurse's station, scrolling through labs on a tablet, half talking to himself. 6 months in that chair. I've seen him cry exactly once. First week. Since then, nothing. It's like someone turned off the lights inside him. Nurse Jennifer Dawson, 29 years old with sharp eyes and sharper instincts, didn't look up from her charting. "Leave him alone, Marcus. His daughter's been in a coma since June." His wife died in the same accident. You want him to smile for you. I'm not saying that. I'm saying it's eerie. He doesn't watch TV. Doesn't read. Doesn't even look at his phone. He just sits there staring at her like he's waiting for something. He's waiting for her to wake up. Yeah, well. 6 months of traumatic brain injury recovery? The odds aren't. Marcus. Jennifer's voice went cold enough to frost glass. Finish your charting and go check on 307. Now. Marcus muttered something under his breath and wandered off, tablet in hand, already forgetting the conversation. What Marcus Webb didn't notice, because he was trained to see disease not danger, was that when the supply cart rattled 3 rooms away, Rico's eyes didn't track toward the sound. They shifted to the exit sign, calculating distance. When the night janitor's keys jangled down the hallway, Rico's right hand resting loosely on the chair's armrest flexed once. A test of grip strength, a muscle memory check. When the elevator dinged at the far end of the wing, Rico's breathing changed, shifting from the slow rhythm of a man half asleep to something controlled, measured, deliberate. The way a sniper breathes before the shot. Rico Maldini had no charts to update. No labs to review. No medical training to justify his presence in this building beyond the biological fact that the girl in bed 302 carried half his DNA. But he had been counting. For 6 months he had been counting. 23 steps from room 302 to the supply closet where they kept extra linens, syringes and, if you knew where to look, surgical wire thin enough to disappear in low light. 17 steps to the stairwell, the door that was supposed to be locked but hadn't latched properly since August. 9 steps to the elevator, the one with the slight delay between the chime and the door's opening. 2 seconds. Enough time to move. The oxygen supply line ran along the east wall, feeding into rooms 298 through 310. High pressure. Flammable if compromised near an ignition source. The defibrillator cart in the alcove near room 304 had been tested on Tuesday. Full charge. 200 joules. Enough to stop a heart, or restart one depending on your intention. The fire extinguisher mounted by the nurse's station had been inspected last week. The tag was dated and signed. Full pressure. CO2 model. No residue. Jennifer Dawson thought Rico was a grieving father. Dr. Patel thought he was quietly dissociating, his mind shut down by trauma. Marcus Webb thought he was furniture. They didn't know that Rico Maldini hadn't just been grieving for 6 months. He had been preparing as well. 12 years ago, Rico Maldini wasn't sitting in a hospital room holding his daughter's hand. He was holding the city of San Lucian by the throat. They called him the architect of ash, not because he burned things but because when he was done that's all that remained. He didn't start wars. He ended bloodlines. He ran the Maldini family's operations with the precision of a Swiss watchmaker and the empathy of a guillotine. He never raised his voice at the table, because men who understood power knew that the quietest voice in the room was often the one that issued the final order. In 2013, a rival crew tried to move heroin through the docks without paying tribute. Rico didn't retaliate with violence. He bought the dock workers' union, rerouted their shipments to a DA checkpoint, and watched from a restaurant 2 miles away as 16 men were arrested on federal trafficking charges. Clean hands. Clear alibi. Perfect execution. In 2016, a federal witness named Anthony Ruiz was set to testify against a Maldini lieutenant. Ruiz disappeared 3 days before trial. His car was found at the airport. His credit cards were used in Mexico City. His body was never found. Rico had been in New York that entire week, photographed at a charity gala with the mayor. The FBI knew it was him. They could never prove it, because the architect didn't touch the bricks. He just drew the blueprint and watched the structure collapse. Then Sophia was born and the entire foundation shifted. Rico had been 38, standing in a delivery room watching a 6-pound-per-ounce human being scream her way into existence. And for the first time in his adult life he felt something other than control. He felt terror. Because this tiny red-faced creature with her mother's eyes and his stubborn chin was something he couldn't architect. Couldn't strategize. Couldn't protect with blueprints and bought men and buried bodies. He tried. God, he tried. He pulled back from operations. Let his cousin Dante handle the day-to-day. Spent mornings making pancakes in the shape of dinosaurs and nights reading Goodnight Moon until his voice went hoarse. Then came the accident. A drunk driver. A guardrail. A 3-second span of time that erased his wife and left Sophia with a traumatic brain injury that the doctors described in terms like significant and uncertain prognosis, and will know more with time. Rico Maldini walked away from the Empire that day. He told Dante to handle it. Told the captains he was out. Told the family that the architect had drawn his last blueprint. He sat in room 302 for 6 months, holding Sophia's hand, whispering promises she couldn't hear. Promises that he would be different. That he would be the father she deserved. That when she woke up, when not if, he would be a man she could be proud of. The old skills didn't die though. They just went quiet. Waiting in the spaces between heartbeats. Watching the exits. Counting the steps. At 2:51 a.m. the elevator at the end of the hall chimed. Ding. Rico Maldini set down his spoon. The jello stopped trembling. In the blue glow of the monitors, Rico's face didn't change. His breathing didn't quicken. His hands, those hands that had signed execution orders and held his daughter's tiny fingers, remained perfectly still. But his eyes shifted. From Sophia's face to the door. From the door to the hallway beyond. And in the polished reflection of the 4 stand beside the bed, Rico Maldini watched 5 shadows step off the elevator. Tactical boots. Suppressed rifles. White porcelain masks that caught the emergency lighting like skulls. Professional spacing. Military stack formation. Suppressed comms gear. The Vane Syndicate. Rico's heart rate didn't spike. It dropped, from 72 beats per minute to 58. The way it used to before a meeting where someone wasn't going to leave alive. Sophia's heart monitor beeped steadily in the background, a rhythmic reminder of everything he had to lose. Beep. 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 Rico Maldini stood up slowly, smoothing the wrinkles from his gray Henley, and walked to the door of room 302. He stepped into the hallway. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. Nurse Dawson was at the station, headphones in, charting. Dr. Webb was in the break room, probably scrolling through his phone. And 5 men with guns were spreading out through the pediatric wing like a disease. Rico Maldini had spent 6 months being invisible. 6 months being harmless. 6 months being the broken man everyone pitied. That man died the moment the elevator doors opened. The architect of Ash had work to do. And the building, every oxygen line, every supply closet, every shadow and corner he had memorized, was about to become his cathedral. The first gunman turned the corner toward the nurse's station. Rico Maldini turned toward the supply closet. The sterile white hallway of San Lucian General would never be the same. Rico Maldini had been invisible for 183 days. He knew the exact number because Sophia's accident happened on a Tuesday, and today was also a Tuesday, and he had counted every single rotation of the earth since the moment the doctor told him his daughter might never wake up. 183 days of wearing the same gray Henley, rotating between 2 pairs of dark jeans, sitting in the same blue vinyl chair that had molded itself to the shape of his spine. The nurses had stopped asking his name after the first month. He had become a fixture like the hand sanitizer dispensers or the motivational poster near the elevator that said "Healing happens here" in cursive font that was supposed to look hopeful but just looked tired. They called him the man in gray when they thought he couldn't hear. Sometimes just 302's dad. Never Rico. Never Maldini. That name carried weight in certain parts of the city. In certain rooms where men spoke in lowered voices about territories and percentages and the cost of disrespect. But here in the antiseptic glow of the pediatric ICU, that name meant nothing. Here he was just a father who had forgotten how to leave. Jennifer Dawson was the only one who treated him like he was still human. She worked the overnight shift Thursday through Monday, and somewhere around week 3 she had stopped asking if he needed anything and just started bringing it. Black coffee at 11 p.m. when she clocked in. A turkey sandwich at 2 a.m. plain no mayo because she'd noticed he never ate the mayo. A warm blanket at 4 a.m. when the hospital dropped the thermostat to save money and his hands started to shake. She never asked why he was shaking. Tonight she set the coffee down on the narrow windowsill beside his chair without a word. Just a gentle touch on his shoulder. 3 seconds, no more. And then she was gone, rubber-soled shoes squeaking softly against the linoleum as she made her rounds. Rico watched her go, watched the way she checked the 4 drip in 304, the way she smiled at the night janitor and asked about his daughter's quinceanera. Jennifer Dawson was 29 years old, had a student loan debt that probably matched her annual salary, and chose to spend her nights in a building that smelled like industrial cleaner and broken promises. She was kind for no reason. Expected nothing. Asked for nothing. Rico didn't understand people like that anymore. Kindness in his former life was currency. A transaction. You gave it to buy loyalty or create debt. You never gave it for free because free meant weakness and weakness meant a bullet in a parking garage. But Jennifer Dawson didn't know who he was. Didn't know the things he'd done. She looked at him and saw a grieving father, and she brought him coffee because that's what decent people did. It had been so long since anyone had treated him like he was decent. Sophia's ventilator hissed softly in the rhythm that had become his heartbeat. Then pause out. Then pause out. The monitors traced her vitals in green lines that never changed, and Rico held her hand the way he did every night, his thumb brushing across her small knuckles, counting the bones beneath her skin. She had his mother's hands. Long fingers. Pianist hands, his wife used to say back when his wife was still alive to say things. Rico closed his eyes and let the exhaustion pull at him, the kind of tired that lived in your bones and never left. He had almost convinced himself that this was his life now. This chair. This room. This vigil. He had almost convinced himself that the architect of Ash was dead. Then the elevator timed at the end of the hall, and Rico Maldini opened his eyes and the counting began again. The elevator doors slid open with a mechanical whisper, and Rico Maldini knew exactly what was coming before the first boot touched the floor. It wasn't instinct. It was pattern recognition. The kind of knowledge that lived in the bones of men who had spent years watching other men prepare to kill. 5 of them. Tactical formation. Lead man stepping out first, rifle up, scanning left. Second man immediate right, covering the opposite angle. Third and fourth fanning to create a diamond perimeter. Fifth man, the anchor, staying in the elevator threshold, controlling their exit. Professional. Military. Expensive. Not common thieves. Not desperate junkies looking for pharmaceuticals. Not even gang enforcers trying to send a message to the wrong patient. This was a hit team. And they were wearing porcelain white masks. Smooth, featureless, like something carved from bone. The kind of masks that made witnesses remember the masks instead of the faces. The kind that said, "We don't expect to leave anyone alive to identify us, but we're careful anyway." Rico's first thought was calm, almost clinical. The Vane Syndicate finally found me. His second thought was colder. They brought 5 men for one target. They're scared. His third thought tasted like iron. Jennifer Dawson is at the nurse's station. 43 steps from the elevator. Headphones in. He doesn't know. The lead man moved with the efficiency of someone who had cleared rooms in Fallujah or Kandahar or some other place where hesitation measured lifespan in seconds. Suppressed rifle, an MCX, Rico noted, expensive choice, held in a low-ready position. His boots made almost no sound against the linoleum. Gloved hands. No comms chatter. They were using hand signals. Rico watched them through the gap in his doorway, his body angled so he was invisible from their sight line. He wasn't breathing heavy. Wasn't panicking. The old rhythm came back like muscle memory, the way a pianist's fingers remember a concerto even after years away from the keys. Count the enemy. Assess the weapons. Suppressed rifles, likely 5.56 millimeters. Sidearms visible on 3 of them. No shotguns, they wanted precision, not spray. Identify the leader. Lead man with the M6. Moves like he's done this 100 times. He'll be the problem. Map the exits. Stairwell 17 steps behind him. Elevator compromised. Windows don't open on this floor. Fire code. The only way out is through them. The third man in the stack peeled off toward the nurse's station and Rico's jaw tightened. He could see Jennifer now, head bobbing slightly to whatever music was playing in her headphones, completely unaware that a man with a rifle was moving toward her like a shadow. Rico's hand moved to the door frame, fingers curling against the wood. He had 2 choices and both of them ended the life he'd been trying to build for the last 6 months. Option 1. Stay in the room, close the door, hope they were here for someone else. Let the professionals do their work and disappear. Go back to being invisible. But he already knew they weren't here for someone else. The lead man was moving directly toward room 302. Option 2. Step into the hallway and become the architect of Ash again. Except that the man who made pancakes in the shape of dinosaurs and read bedtime stories was dead. Except that the only way to protect Sophia, to protect Jennifer, to protect every sleeping child in this wing, was to remember exactly how many men he'd buried in unmarked graves. The lead man was 12 steps away now. 11. 10. Behind him, Sophia's ventilator hissed its steady rhythm. And pause out. Rico Maldini stepped back from the door, moving silently toward the small closet where the hospital kept extra blankets and supplies. His hand found what he was looking for in 3 seconds. The metal bedpan, cold and heavy. Not elegant. Not sophisticated. But close-quarters combat had never been about elegance. 9 steps. 8. Rico's reflection stared back at him from the darkened window. A man in a gray Henley with hollow eyes and hands that had forgotten how to tremble. The architect of Ash looked back. And for the first time in 183 days, they were the same person. The lights died first. Not all of them, just the main overheads, plunging the corridor into the dim amber glow of emergency lighting. It was precise, calculated. Someone had cut the power to the 3rd floor at the breaker, leaving just enough illumination to navigate but not enough to see clearly. Rico heard Jennifer's confused gasp from the nurse's station, the small sound of her pulling out her headphones. Then he heard something worse, the quiet, professional voice of the 3rd gunman saying, "Don't move. Hands on the desk. You make a sound, you die." No screaming. No commotion. The man knew how to control a hostage. Rico's mind catalogued the situation in fragments. Communications cut. Power compromised. Hostage secured. They were isolating the floor, turning it into a black site where they could work without interruption. Standard protocol for a high-value elimination. He'd ordered the same procedure himself years ago in a warehouse near the docks. The lead man was 6 steps from room 302 now, moving through the half-light like smoke. Rico set the bedpan down silently and moved to the door, his body low, his breathing controlled. He glanced back once at Sophia, her small face peaceful in the glow of the monitors, unaware that her father was about to do things that would make him unrecognizable. He mouthed 3 words she couldn't hear, "I love you." Then he slipped through the door. The corridor stretched before him in shades of amber and shadow. The emergency lights created pools of visibility with stretches of darkness between them, and Rico moved through those dark spaces like he'd been born in them. No shuffling. No hesitation. Each step placed with the precision of a man who understood that sound was the difference between breathing and bleeding out. The father in the gray Henley, the man who ate jello and whispered bedtime stories, stayed behind in room 302. The man who stepped into the hallway was something older. Something colder. The architect didn't carry weapons because he didn't need to. He carried knowledge. The layout of every room, the location of every supply closet, the pressure capacity of every oxygen tank. He carried patience. The willingness to wait, to watch, to let the enemy come to him. He carried certainty. The absolute conviction that when violence began, it would end with him standing. Rico moved past room 304 where an 8-year-old boy with leukemia was sleeping, past room 306 where twin girls born premature were fighting for every breath. He knew their names. Had seen their parents crying in the family waiting room. Had watched Jennifer check their vitals with the kind of gentle care that suggested she saw them as children, not cases. These weren't acceptable casualties. These were the reason the men in porcelain masks had made a fatal miscalculation. The lead gunman reached room 302 and pushed the door open, rifle raised. Rico heard the soft sound of his boots on the floor, the slight exhale as he scanned the room and found only a sleeping child and an empty chair. "Target's not here," the man whispered into his calm room's clear. "Just the girl. Just the girl." Rico's hands curled into fists. The second gunman's voice crackled through the team's communications, barely audible. "Check the floor. He's here somewhere. Lock it down. No one in, no one out." The fourth man moved toward the stairwell, toward Rico's only viable exit. The fifth man stayed at the elevator, controlling their extraction point. And the third man stayed with Jennifer, his rifle trained on the back of her head while she sat frozen at the nurse's station. Perfect positioning. Overlapping fields of fire. Controlled environment. They'd done this before. But Rico Maldini had invented this. He pressed himself against the wall near the supply closet, calculating angles and distances. 5 men. 4 needed to die. 1 needed to stay alive long enough to send a message back to whoever ordered this. The architect of Ash was not negotiable. Not for money. Not for territory. Not for revenge. And certainly not in a building full of children. The lead gunman stepped out of room 302, speaking quietly into his comm, searching adjacent rooms. Stand by. Rico watched him approach room 304. The boy with leukemia. The architect made his first move. He opened the supply closet door. Not fast, not loud, just enough to create a sound in the silence. A whisper of hinges. A breath of displaced air. The lead gunman's head snapped toward the noise, rifle tracking. Enrico Maldini stepped into the shadow beside the door frame and became a ghost waiting for prey that had forgotten to be afraid. The lead gunman moved toward the supply closet with textbook precision. Rifle up, eyes scanning, finger indexed along the trigger guard. He'd done this 1,000 times. Cleared 1,000 rooms. Survived 1,000 threats. But he'd never cleared a room where the architect of the building was waiting inside. Rico let him get 3 steps past the threshold before he moved. No hesitation. No warning. Just the sudden, explosive violence of a man who understood that mercy in close quarters was just another word for dying slowly. The defibrillator cart had been in the alcove near room 304 for 6 months. Rico had watched them test it, charge it, certify it. He'd counted the seconds it took to power on, 4.5, and memorized the sound it made when it reached full charge. That high-pitched whine that meant 200 joules of electricity were coiled and waiting. It was already charged when he grabbed it. The lead gunman heard the cart's wheels an instant too late, turned halfway, and Rico pressed the paddles against the back of his neck where the tactical vest didn't cover, right at the base of the skull where the brainstem met the spine. The discharge made a sound like a thunderclap in a closet. The gunman dropped without a word, his rifle clattering against the floor, his body convulsing once before going completely still. Not dead. Rico hadn't used enough voltage for that, but deeply, catastrophically unconscious. The kind of unconscious that came with retrograde amnesia and weeks of neurological monitoring. Rico caught the rifle before it hit the ground, his muscle memory taking over. He ejected the magazine, cleared the chamber and field stripped the weapon in 8 seconds. Bolt carrier group removed, firing pin extracted, reassembly impossible without tools. He scattered the pieces in 3 different directions and took only the suppressor, threading it into his waistband. 1 down. 4 remaining. The second gunman's voice crackled through the fallen man's comm. Sit rep 1. You copy. Silence. 1 respond. Rico was already moving. He dragged the unconscious man into the supply closet and closed the door, then slipped back into the corridor. The second gunman would come looking. They always did. Protocol dictated that you never left a man behind, and protocol was what got operators killed in environments they didn't understand. The second gunman appeared at the end of the hallway 20 seconds later, moving faster now, concerned. His mistake was assuming the threat was external. Something waiting in the rooms, hiding behind doors. He didn't look up. Rico had climbed onto the supply cart near room 306, positioning himself above the sightline, pressed against the ceiling tiles where the shadows were deepest. It was uncomfortable. It required perfect stillness. But elevation was an advantage most people forgot to check, and most people died in the places they forgot to look. The second gunman passed directly beneath him, whispering urgently into his comm. 1 is down. Repeat, 1 is down. Location supply closet near. Rico dropped. Not onto him. That would have been loud, clumsy. Instead, Rico dropped beside him, landing in a crouch, and before the man could pivot, Rico had the surgical wire from the supply cart wrapped around his throat. Monofilament. Thin as fishing line. Strong enough to suture major arteries. More than strong enough to collapse a trachea. The gunman tried to bring his rifle around, but Rico had already anticipated the angle. He stepped inside the man's reach, using his body weight as leverage, pulling the wire tighter. The man's hands went to his throat, instinct, not training, and his rifle clattered to the floor. Rico counted to 7. The time it took for oxygen deprivation to rob the brain of consciousness. Not long enough to cause permanent damage. Long enough to end the threat. The gunman went limp and Rico lowered him silently to the floor. He field-stripped the second rifle, took the spare magazines and checked the man's tactical vest. Flashbang grenades. Zip ties. A tactical knife. And a photo laminated and tucked into a pocket near his chest. Rico pulled it out. A woman. 2 kids. Birthday cake. Smiling. He stared at it for 3 seconds then put it back. The architect of Ash had done many things in his life. He'd ordered executions. He'd sanctioned disappearances. He'd made decisions that erased entire families from the city's memory. But he'd never killed a man who carried pictures of his children into a gunfight. Not yet. Rico stood, his breathing still controlled, his heartbeat still steady at 58 beats per minute. 2 down. 3 remaining. And somewhere in the darkness, Jennifer Dawson was sitting at the nurse's station with a rifle pointed at her head, praying to a god she probably didn't believe in that someone would save her. Rico Maldini disappeared back into the shadows. Someone was coming. The voice that echoed through the darkened corridor didn't belong to a soldier anymore. It belonged to a man who had just realized he'd walked into a trap he didn't understand. Maldini. The word hung in the air like a curse. Like a prayer. Like the sound of inevitability. The fifth man, the anchor who'd stayed at the elevator, was now standing in the center of the hallway, his rifle lowered, his porcelain mask reflecting the emergency lights in fractured angles. He'd pulled Jennifer Dawson from the nurse's station, one gloved hand wrapped around her upper arm, the other pressing a pistol against her temple. She was shaking. Rico could see it even from 30 feet away, the way her shoulders trembled, the way her breath came in shallow gasps. But she wasn't crying. Wasn't begging. She was staring straight ahead at nothing, her jaw clenched, trying to disappear into herself. "I know you're here," the man called out. His voice was calm, professional, but there was an edge underneath. The kind of edge that came from losing 2 men in 6 minutes and having no idea how. "2 of my men are down. No shots fired. No noise. That's not luck. That's skill." Rico stayed perfectly still in the supply room doorway, his body pressed against the frame, invisible in the dark. "I did my homework, Maldini. I know who you are. I know what you built. The architect of Ash." The man's laugh was bitter. "I thought that was just a story they told to scare people. Turns out stories don't take down trained operators without making a sound." Jennifer's eyes were squeezed shut now, and Rico could see her lips moving. Counting maybe. Praying. Trying to find some mental space where a gun wasn't pressed against her skull. "Here's how this works," the man continued. "You step into the light in the next 60 seconds or I execute the nurse. Then I go room to room and execute every patient on this floor until you show yourself. Starting with the kids." Rico's jaw tightened. "I don't want to do that. This isn't about them. This is about you. The Vane Syndicate sends its regards, by the way. Dante says hello. Says you abandoned the family. Says you went soft. Says you're not the architect anymore, just a grieving father who forgot where he came from." The name landed like a fist to the sternum. His cousin. The man he'd trusted to hold the empire together while he sat beside Sophia's bed. The man who'd promised nothing would change. The man who'd looked him in the eye 6 months ago and said, "Take all the time you need." Betrayal always came from the people closest to you. Rico had taught that lesson himself. 45 seconds, Maldini. "Then I start making orphans." Jennifer's eyes opened. She was looking down the hallway now, searching the shadows, and Rico realized with a cold certainty that she knew. Maybe not consciously. Maybe not in words. But some part of her understood that the man in gray who ate jello and held his daughter's hand wasn't just a grieving father. She'd seen the way he moved through the hospital. The way he noticed things. The way his eyes tracked exits. She'd known, and she'd brought him coffee anyway. 30 seconds. Rico stepped out of the shadows. Not slowly. Not hesitantly. He walked into the amber light of the emergency corridor with his hands at his sides, his gray Henley stained with dust from the ceiling tiles, his face expressionless. The gunman's weapon shifted from Jennifer to Rico. "There you are." "Let her go," Rico said. His voice was quiet, almost conversational. "She's not part of this. She is now. Drop to your knees. Hands behind your head." Rico didn't move. "You're going to die in this hallway. You know that, right?" The gunman laughed. "I'm the one holding the gun. You're holding a hostage you can't afford to kill. The moment you shoot her, you lose the only leverage keeping me from turning your skull into abstract art with that fire extinguisher behind you." The man's mask turned slightly, a subconscious glance toward the fire extinguisher mounted on the wall. It was all Rico needed. "Your men aren't coming back," Rico continued, his voice dropping lower. "They're breathing. They're alive. I made that choice. But you. He took one step forward. You put a gun to the head of the woman who brings me coffee. Who asks about Sophia. Who treats dying children like they're her own. Another step. That was a mistake. The gunman's hand tightened on Jennifer's arm. Stay back or she dies. Rico smiled. It was a terrible thing. The smile of a man who'd calculated every possible outcome and found them all acceptable. Then pull the trigger, Rico said softly. And see what happens next. The gunman's finger trembled on the trigger. Not from fear, not yet, but from the cognitive dissonance of watching an unarmed man walk toward certain death with the confidence of someone holding all the cards. Rico didn't run. Didn't dive for cover. He walked down the center of the hallway with his hands loose at his sides, his footsteps echoing in the silence, his eyes locked on the porcelain mask like it was the only thing that existed in the world. Behind the mask, Rico could see the man's pupils dilating. Could see the slight shift in his stance as his brain screamed at him that something was wrong, that the prey was acting like the predator, that men who were about to die didn't walk like they owned the ground beneath their feet. Last warning, Maldini. On your knees or she dies. Rico kept walking. 5 steps away now. Close enough to see the tension in Jennifer's jaw, the way she'd stopped shaking and started calculating. She was a trauma nurse. She'd seen violence. She understood that sometimes survival meant staying perfectly still while chaos unfolded around you. You don't want to do this, Rico said. His voice was conversational, almost friendly. You're thinking about the 2 men I took down without making a sound. You're wondering how. You're wondering if the stories are true, if the architect really did what they said he did. 4 steps. Let me help you. Rico's smile widened, and it was the worst thing the gunman had ever seen. The stories don't do it justice. 3 steps. The gunman's weapon shifted, just slightly, from Jennifer's temple toward Rico. A subconscious reaction. Target prioritization. The brain deciding that the greater threat wasn't the hostage but the man walking toward him like death in a gray Henley. It was the opening Rico had been engineering for 30 seconds. Your 4th man is at the stairwell, Rico continued, still walking. He's smart. Stayed in position. Didn't come running when you called. But he's listening right now, isn't he? Hearing you lose control of the situation. Hearing you panic. 2 steps. And your 6th man. Oh wait. Rico paused, tilting his head. There is no 6th man. You came with 5. 2 are sleeping. 1 is you. 1 is at the stairwell. That means 1 is still unaccounted for. The gunman's breathing quickened. Stay back. Where's your 3rd man? Rico asked softly. The one who was watching the elevator. The one who was supposed to cover your exit. Where did he go? 1 step. Rico stopped directly in front of the gunman, close enough that the barrel of the pistol was inches from his chest. Close enough that Jennifer could hear him breathing. Slow, measured, completely calm. He went to check on his partners, Rico said. Because that's what good soldiers do. They don't leave men behind. And right now he's standing over 2 unconscious operators wondering what the hell happened. Wondering if the hospital has some kind of security he didn't know about. Wondering if he's next. Rico leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper. He is. The gunman made his choice. He shoved Jennifer away, hard, and brought his weapon up toward Rico's face. He was fast. Professionally trained. Combat tested. He was too slow. Rico's left hand caught the gunman's wrist, redirecting the barrel away from his head with a precision that came from 1,000 hours of Krav Maga training he'd never stopped practicing. His right hand drove forward. Not a punch but an open palm strike to the base of the porcelain mask, shattering it and driving fragments into the man's nose and orbital bone. The gunman staggered backward, blood pouring from beneath the broken mask, and Rico followed him like a shadow. A knee to the solar plexus. An elbow to the temple. A controlled takedown that put the man face first onto the floor in 3 seconds. Rico dropped onto the man's back, his forearm across the gunman's throat. Not choking, just controlling, and leaned close to his ear. The children in this ward are under my protection, Rico whispered. The nurses who care for them are under my protection. My daughter is under my protection. You tell Dante that when you wake up. You tell him the architect isn't retired. He's just been waiting for someone stupid enough to make him remember why they used to be afraid. The gunman tried to respond, but Rico increased pressure on the carotid artery, and 8 seconds later the man went limp. 3 down. 2 remaining. Jennifer was pressed against the wall, staring at Rico with wide eyes. Not fear, something else. Recognition maybe. Understanding. Rico stood slowly, wiping blood from his hands onto his jeans and looked at her. Go to room 302, he said quietly. Lock the door. Stay with Sophia. Don't come out until I tell you it's safe. Who are you? She whispered. Rico Maldini looked down the hallway toward the stairwell where the 4th man was waiting. Toward the darkness where the 5th man was hunting. I'm the reason, he said. They should have left us alone. Then he walked toward the stairwell and the hospital hallway swallowed him whole. The 4th man had made the mistake of choosing good tactics over perfect tactics. He'd positioned himself at the stairwell with clear sight lines down the eastern corridor, his rifle braced against the door frame, waiting for Rico to come to him. What he didn't account for was that Rico Maldini had been counting oxygen supply lines for 6 months. The eastern corridor fed rooms 298 through 310, 12 rooms, 12 high-pressure oxygen lines running through the wall, converging at a central distribution hub mounted near the stairwell. Medical-grade oxygen. 99% pure. Highly pressurized. Extremely flammable in the presence of ignition sources. The warning placard on the wall said it clearly. No smoking. No open flames. No electrical devices within 10 feet. The 4th gunman was standing 8 feet away, his tactical flashlight mounted to his rifle, LED bulb bright enough to illuminate the corridor. Rico approached from the opposite direction, moving through room 308, a storage space filled with unused equipment, and emerged behind the oxygen distribution hub. He could see the gunman's silhouette, could hear his controlled breathing, could see the slight shift in his stance as he scanned for movement. Professional. Patient. Dangerous. Rico reached for the oxygen hub's maintenance valve and turned it counterclockwise. Not all the way, that would have been suicide, just enough to create a controlled leak. The hiss was soft, almost imperceptible, but in the silence of the darkened corridor it was as loud as a scream. The gunman heard it. His head turned toward the sound, rifle tracking. I can hear you breathing, Rico called out from behind the hub. His voice was calm, conversational. The oxygen line behind you is leaking. Medical grade. Highly flammable. You're standing in a cloud of it right now. The gunman froze. His tactical light illuminated the faint shimmer in the air, the distortion that came from oxygen displacing normal atmosphere. Your rifle has a muzzle flash, Rico continued. Small but enough. One shot in this concentration and the entire corridor becomes a fireball. You die. I die. The children in these rooms die. Everyone. The gunman's finger moved away from the trigger. You're bluffing. Am I? Rico stepped out from behind the hub, hands visible, empty. Test it. Fire a round. See what happens. The 2 men stood 15 feet apart in the amber emergency lighting, separated by an invisible cloud of oxygen that had turned the corridor into a bomb waiting for ignition. Here's your problem, Rico said. You're trained. You're disciplined. You follow protocol. And protocol says you don't take unnecessary risks. You don't gamble with your life when there's a better option. The gunman's stance shifted slightly. What option? Put down the rifle. Walk away. You're the 4th man I've neutralized tonight, but you're the first one I'm offering a choice. You don't work for me. You work for Dante. He pays you to do a job. But Dante's not here. He's not the one breathing oxygen-rich air with his finger on a trigger that could incinerate him. I'm not leaving without completing the contract. The contract is already failed, Rico said. 3 of your men are down. Your leader is unconscious. The target, me, is still breathing. The only question now is whether you join them in the hospital beds or whether you walk out and tell Dante that the architect of Ash is not negotiable. The gunman's rifle lowered slightly. Not surrender. Calculation. He was running the numbers, weighing the odds, trying to find an angle that didn't end with him on fire. You're light, Rico said softly. Lead. Battery powered. If that battery shorts, if there's any kind of electrical fault, this whole corridor goes up. And you're holding it. The gunman looked down at his rifle-mounted light. At the oxygen valve behind Rico that was still hissing softly. At the warning placard on the wall. This is the difference between you and me, Rico said. You're willing to die for a paycheck. I'm willing to let you live so you can deliver a message. The deadliest thing about me isn't what I can do, it's what I choose not to do. Rico reached back and turned the oxygen valve, shutting off the leak. The hissing stopped. The invisible cloud began to dissipate, pulled away by the hospital's ventilation system. Your move, Rico said. The gunman stared at him for a long moment. Then he carefully, very carefully, set his rifle on the ground, removed his sidearm and placed it beside the rifle. Tell Dante, the gunman said, his voice tight with controlled anger, that he sent 5 men to kill a ghost. And ghosts don't die. No, Rico said quietly. But they remember. And they wait. And when the time is right, they collect. The gunman walked backward down the corridor, hands visible, eyes never leaving Rico until he reached the elevator and disappeared. 4 down. 1 remaining. And that last one was already inside room 302. Rico ran. Not tactically. Not carefully. He ran the way a father runs when his child is in danger. With everything he had, consequences be damned. The door to room 302 was ajar, and through the gap Rico could see the 5th man standing at Sophia's bedside, his rifle pointed down at her small sleeping form. The man had removed his porcelain mask and his face was young, maybe 25, with the kind of hard eyes that came from seeing too much too soon. Stop right there, the man said quietly. His weapon didn't waver. 1 more step and I put 3 rounds through her ventilator. She suffocates in 90 seconds. Rico stopped in the doorway, his chest heaving, his hands clenched into fists. She's not part of this. Neither were a lot of people. But here we are. The young man's jaw tightened. My brother was one of yours. Marco Vega. You remember that name? Rico's mind flipped through a decade of faces, names, operations. Marco Vega. Soldier. Mid-level enforcer. Tried to skim from a drug shipment in 2019. Rico had ordered him removed from the organization. Not killed, just removed. Sent him south with enough money to start over. I remember, Rico said. I let him live. You destroyed him. The young man's voice cracked slightly. He OD'd in Tijuana 6 months later. Fentanyl-laced heroin. Dead at 32. So don't tell me you let him live. You just made someone else pull the trigger. Rico said nothing. There was nothing to say. The man was right. Dante told me you'd gone soft. Said you'd forgotten what the family was. Said you'd abandoned us for her. The rifle shifted slightly towards Sophia. Wanted me to make you remember what it costs to walk away. Then shoot me, Rico said. Put the rifle on me and pull the trigger. But you leave her out of it. That's not the job. Then make it the job. Rico took 1 step into the room. You want justice for Marco? I'm standing right here. I gave the order. I made the call. She's 6 years old. She's never hurt anyone. She doesn't even know who I am, who I was. The young man's finger trembled on the trigger. Get on your knees. Rico moved forward instead. Another step. Then another. Walking slowly toward the rifle, toward his daughter, toward the only thing in the world that mattered. I said on your knees. No. Rico's voice was quiet, absolute. You want to shoot someone, you shoot me. But you don't touch her. You don't breathe on her. You don't exist in her world. The rifle cracked once, suppressed but still loud in the small room, and Rico felt the impact punch through his left shoulder. The pain was immediate, white-hot, radiating down his arm and across his chest. He staggered but didn't fall. I said stop. Rico kept walking. Blood was spreading across his gray Henley now, dark and wet, but his eyes never left the young man's face. Shoot me again, Rico said. As many times as you need. But I'm standing between you and her. That's not changing. Another shot. This one caught Rico in the side just below his ribs. His leg buckled and he dropped to 1 knee beside Sophia's bed. His hand reached out, not toward the gunman, but toward his daughter's small fingers wrapped around the edge of her blanket. I'm sorry, Rico whispered. Not to the young man. To Sophia. I'm sorry I brought this to you. I'm sorry I thought I could be different. I'm sorry. The 3rd shot didn't come. Rico looked up through the pain and saw the young man's hands shaking. Saw the rifle lowering. Saw something break behind those hard eyes. My brother never got a chance, the young man said, his voice barely audible. You gave him money and sent him away like garbage. But you stayed. You sat here for 6 months. You didn't run. You didn't hide. You just sat here. Rico's breathing was labored now, each inhale sending fire through his torso. I'm not the man I was. But I'm still her father. And I'll die before I let anyone hurt her. The young man stared at him for a long moment. Then he lowered his rifle completely and backed toward the door. Dante's going to kill me for this. Then don't go back, Rico said through gritted teeth. Walk away. Start over. Be better than Marco. Be better than me. The young man looked at Sophia one last time, then at Rico bleeding on the floor beside her bed. She's lucky, he said quietly, to have someone willing to die for her. Then he was gone. Rico collapsed against the side of Sophia's bed, his hands still holding hers, his blood pooling on the sterile hospital floor. The ventilator hissed its steady rhythm. The monitors beeped. And through the door Rico could hear sirens in the distance. Help was coming. He just had to stay awake long enough to see it arrive. The police found 5 men unconscious and 1 man bleeding in a blue vinyl chair. They came with guns drawn and voices raised, flooding the 3rd floor with tactical lights and urgent commands. Detective Sarah Chin, no relation to Jennifer, led the response team, her service weapon trained on shadows while uniformed officers secured the scene. What they found didn't make sense. 5 men in tactical gear scattered across the pediatric wing. 2 in a supply closet. 1 near the nurse's station. 1 by the stairwell. 1 in the elevator. All breathing. All alive. All unconscious with injuries consistent with non-lethal force. And in room 302 they found Rico Maldini sitting in his usual chair, his gray Henley soaked with blood, his hand holding his daughter's fingers, his eyes fixed on her sleeping face. Sir, we need medical assistance in here. Officer Martinez called out, holstering his weapon and moving toward Rico. Sir, can you hear me? Can you tell me what happened? Rico's head turned slowly, his face pale from blood loss. Armed men, he said quietly, came to hurt my daughter. I tried to stop them. You tried to? Martinez looked at the 2 gunshot wounds, the blood on the floor, the unconscious gunman in the hallway. Sir, you need to stay still. Paramedics are coming. Jennifer Dawson appeared in the doorway, her scrubs torn, her face streaked with tears and dust. She pushed past Martinez and knelt beside Rico, her hands already assessing his wounds with the practiced efficiency of someone who'd seen worse in trauma bays. He saved us, she said, her voice steady despite everything. All of us. The children. The staff. He stopped them. Detective Chin entered the room, her sharp eyes taking in the scene. Ma'am, I need you to step back. This is a crime scene. He's bleeding out, Jennifer said flatly. He's the victim. And if you don't let me stop this hemorrhaging, you won't have anyone to question. Chin hesitated then nodded. Work fast. Jennifer's hands moved with precision, packing gauze into the wounds, applying pressure. She didn't look at Rico's face. Didn't ask questions. Just worked. Dr. Patel arrived moments later with a crash cart, and together they stabilized Rico enough for transport. The whole time Rico's hand never left Sophia's. Sir, Detective Chin said quietly, crouching beside him. I need to know what happened here. 5 armed men. Military-grade weapons. This wasn't random. Rico's eyes met hers. I don't know who they were. They came for my daughter. I did what any father would do. Any father doesn't take down 5 trained operators. Any father would die trying. Chin studied his face for a long moment. Then she stood, turning to Martinez. Get statements from the staff. I want to know everything they saw. But when Chin interviewed the nurses, she got the same story. Rico Maldini was in his chair when the lights went out. The gunmen entered. There was a struggle. When the lights came back on, the gunmen were down and Rico was wounded protecting his daughter. Marcus Webb, his exhaustion replaced by something like awe, told Chin. He's been here 6 months. Never caused problems. Never raised his voice. I don't know how he did what he did, but I know why. Look at her. He gestured to Sophia. That's why. Jennifer Dawson gave the simplest statement. He's a father who loves his daughter. That's all I know. That's all that matters. No one mentioned the architect of Ash. No one mentioned the Maldini name. No one mentioned the precision with which the attackers had been neutralized. The staff of San Lucian General had seen what Rico Maldini was capable of when the people he cared about were threatened. And they had seen him take 2 bullets rather than move from his daughter's bedside. Whatever he had been before, Whatever sins lived in his past, he had earned their silence tonight. 3 days later, Rico Maldini was back in room 302. His left arm was in a sling. His ribs were wrapped tight. His gray Henley had been replaced with a hospital gown, but he'd already asked Jennifer to bring him clothes from the hospital lost and found. He sat in his blue vinyl chair, his good hand holding Sophia's fingers, his eyes fixed on her face. The city knew something had happened at San Lucian General. The news reported an attempted robbery that had been thwarted by hospital security. The 5 men were charged with attempted kidnapping and assault with deadly weapons. Dante Maldini sent no flowers. Made no calls. The message had been received. Jennifer brought Rico coffee at 11 p.m., black, no sugar, and set it on the windowsill without a word. But before she left, she paused at the door. "Thank you," she said softly. Rico didn't look away from Sophia. "For what?" "For being who you needed to be. When we needed you to be it." She left before he could respond. Rico Maldini sat in his chair, holding his daughter's hand, waiting for her to wake up. The man in gray was back. "Thank you for making it to the end. Remember to like, share and subscribe. See you in the next video."